Hello, and welcome back for another week. This makes it the 13th session we've done of these. 14 weeks, I missed one, I admit. But my shoulder's doing a lot better, so hopefully I'll be able to swing things around without too many problems today. Which is good, because we're swinging things around. That is exactly what we are doing today. Today is going to be all about flexible, improvised weaponry. So we'll be talking a lot about swinging things and twirling things and probably trying not to hit ourselves in the back of the head. But I guarantee you now it will happen. At some point I will clock myself in the back of the head. That is your appropriate time to laugh at my dumb ass. Okay, so what are we doing today? Few things. Actually, somebody was asking me recently about gradings. Because we're a martial art, people associate that a lot with gradings. And coloured belts and all of these kind of things. Now, Bartitsu as an overall organisation doesn't have a governing body that sets out and dictates a structure of belts and gradings. So it is really up to each individual club what they want to do. From our point of view, we don't really have gradings. What we have is essentially really only two groups. Okay? Technically there's four, but there's only really two that count. And really they are split between those people I think are safe to spar without being supervised and those that aren't. So when you come into our first level, you are classed as a white or as an initiate, but basically what that means is I don't trust you to spar without having one eye on you because you might do something dangerous. Okay? Once you progress beyond that, you become a black or a scholar, and at that point I'm happy for you to be sparring without my direct supervision with other people who are also at that same level. And that's really the only grading system I use. Other than that, there are... Sorry? Yeah, I'm going to come to that. Don't worry. I'm going to come to that. There are technically two levels above that. There is a green level, which is an adept, which is essentially an assistant instructor. To date, we've never actually had anybody get to that level. It'll happen one day. And then the level above that is red, which is instructor, or provost, which is my job, which is really the person who is the biggest obsessive compulsive of the group and is going to organise everything. Now, when I was asking people how they wanted to know this, we started out with different coloured t-shirts. That's kind of fallen by the wayside, and the current preferred method of indicating your rank is with a bar towel, which, as you can see, I have hanging from the back here because it is a warm day and I know I'm going to need a towel. I have my red bar towel hanging there, which denotes that I am a provost. So if you want to know A, why that's there, and a little bit about how we structure things, and possibly a little bit about our personal little insanities, that is how we organise ourselves in the club. And that allows me to scan across a room and pair people up. Say, I'm going to pair up the scholars and the initiates. I can do that with a quick identification of what colour people are wearing to make sure that people are training appropriately for what we're doing. So anyway, that was a little aside, but also just to explain why on earth I'm doing that. If you want to know about the baseball cap, it's because it's really, really sunny, and I don't want to be blind while I'm hurling bits of metal around my head. So that's not a uniform thing at all. Right, okay, so let's get started with today. So we shall start, as we always do, with falling in. So, we start from attention, and fall in. Great. From a safety note, I will say today, normally I say kind of go at your own pace. All of that still applies, okay? The thing that's important for today is, because we're looking at flexible weapons, is to be aware that they are unpredictable at best. If you are training with them, you will hit yourself, okay? So it is best to start with something soft until you have gained a level of control that you're happy to move to something harder spinning around your head, okay? This is the reason I've known many, many karate teachers that are missing their front two teeth, because rather than starting with foam nunchucks, everybody wants to go to the metal or wood ones that they've seen Bruce Lee using, and you will hit yourself with them, okay? So you start with something soft and padded until you build the dexterity to be safe. So what I'm saying is, feel free to try all of the stuff I'm doing today. There are ways, I'll explain as I'm going through, to practice these safely. Please do that first. Don't take off your belt with your I Love the South buckle that's bigger than my head and start whirling that around. Because what you're going to do is injure yourself really badly, okay? And I've said this now because I can now point to this and go, well, it's not my fault, I told them not to do it, okay? So it's now your responsibility. Practice safely, okay? Just particularly with flexible weapons, I thought I would mention that. So we're going to start out today by looking at a kosh. And what I mean by a kosh is, and this is my kosh replica, okay? This is my nice soft kosh replica. This is a pair of kilt socks that I have taken one off, balled it up and put it in the bottom of the other one. If I wrap that round my hand, I end up with about a foot's worth of flexible bit and then a bobbly bit with a bit of weight in at the end. And that's exactly what I want for a kosh, okay? This will work perfectly well with a pair of sports socks, football socks, whatever. But give yourself something like this so that when it hits you, it doesn't hurt. Now, sadly, I don't actually have a kosh made up. I need to actually make one. But let's tell you a little bit about the kosh, where it starts from. The kosh that we take a lot of our stuff actually comes from more of the French savate tradition, particularly from what they call the slug shot. The slug shot was essentially a bit of lead shot that was from the ships, and you wrap it in essentially rope, and then you have a plait of rope coming off the rope covered lead. So what you end up with is essentially a braided piece of cord with a heavy heavy lump of lead at the end of it. Okay, and this can be hidden up your sleeve. You normally put a little hoop on it that goes around your wrist so you can't drop it. That goes up your sleeve, and you can just literally drop that down out your sleeve into your hand when you need to actually attack somebody with it. Okay, they were used. If you've heard me talk about savate, you'll have heard about me talk about how dangerous the docks of Marseille was. This is another standard weapon in their arsenal. So that's where we take a lot of this from. It's designed for that quick and easy street self-defense. Now, with that said, if you carry a slug shot around with you, it's illegal for starters. Certainly in the UK. I know it is in America as well, which is funny. They'll let you carry a handgun, but not a slug shot. So don't go out and try and carry one of these things around with you. Okay? There's another version which is much more popular these days called a Monkey Paw. It's just the name of the knot. Originally it was used just to tie a monkey paw as like a ball at the end of a piece of rope, and then you can lob it like a ball and it'll take the rope with it. It's just easier for throwing stuff around a ship. But you can again wrap that around, particularly nowadays it tends to be around a steel ball bearing. So you've got an extra bit of weight there, and people use them as keychains. And then you can still use them as a kosh if you need to. Again, illegal, but they're a nice little tool and training tool for what we're talking about here. However, anything which you can pick up, sock, carry a bag, whatever, with a bit of weight in it, you can use like a kosh. Okay? Even something that's got a reasonable bit of flexibility in it. Because I know, for example, if you want to see a slightly different variation on the kosh, if you watch the videos that Tommy Moore put up recently about kosh, he's got a lovely, because he's got loads of money and is really swanky, he's got this lovely braided leather one that's just got a little bit of flexibility in the weight in it. It's a bit shorter than what I'm going to be doing today, but it's that same thing. If you can get something that's got a little bit of flex in it and a weight at one end, you can use it as a kosh. Okay, so that's what we're kind of talking about. My replica today is 2 socks, because when I hit myself in the head, it's embarrassing rather than painful. Right, so what do we, when we start picking up any improvised weapon, we want to look at its properties. The reason for that is you're going to work that backwards in a real life situation. You're going to pick something up, very quickly assess its properties and go, most of these properties fit into this class of improvised weapon, that is how I'm going to use it. Okay? So it's short, and by that I mean 1.5 foot total length from your hand. Okay? Yeah, it's not a cane, it's not a pool cue, it's not a belt, it's not a chair, it's relatively short, okay? You're not going to be using that extra foot to really change the distance of the combat. You're still going to be really in a striking range when you're using this weapon. So it's short. It's flexible, yeah? It's not rigid. You're not going to parry with it. Yeah, it's just not going to happen, okay? So you've got to be aware you can't parry with it, but it's also really difficult to parry, because if somebody parries this, as you'll see, it just goes around. So I can parry this, and it can still happily continue on round and hit me in the head without any problem whatsoever. Okay, so it has benefits and downsides depending on it. The other thing is it's not sharp, okay? That's the other important quality about it. The reason for that is because once we've established what it is, we need to think about how we want to use it. Now, normally if we're fighting, we would want to have the weapon forward because that's what we're planning to use. The problem with this is it's not sharp, yeah? So there's nothing to stop the other person grabbing your hand or grabbing the kosh. And if they've got hold of it, it's then a shared weapon. You both have equal control over it. It's then just an attachment point between the two of you. That doesn't benefit you more than it benefits them, so you don't want that to happen, okay? So you don't want to have it out here on this lead hand, which is going to be doing a lot of parrying and stuff, and this bounces around all over the place and hits you in the face. So instead, we're actually going to switch round and keep the kosh on the back hand, okay? Now, the particular style that I tend to use this with, some people do just have it literally hanging at the side. I prefer to have it up and kind of cocked over one shoulder, because most of my strikes, I'm going to come straight over the top, okay? Whereas from sideways, there's more temptation to swing it across rather than down. The important thing about this is down misses me. Yeah, if I'm here and I swing down, it's beside me. If I go across, it keeps swinging till it slaps into my back. And I don't want to hit myself, okay? Now obviously, ideally I'm going to hit them and it will never get that far. But I can't guarantee on always hitting. So I want to make sure that if it doesn't connect with something, it doesn't then carry on that path and connect with me. So I prefer up, armed, over the shoulder, okay? But other than that, this fist is back almost where it would be for a modern boxing guard, okay? The reason for that being, I've still got that defense on that side if I need it, so I'm not taking away any defensive capacity, okay? And I've got that cocked and ready to go. The other hand I tend to have out and forward. I tend to keep it open just because it comes from Savat, so I tend to use this a lot with the open hand striking techniques. So I'll be looking at things like a massut and things like this rather than necessarily a straight punch. So one hand out in front of you. This is going to primarily be your defense to stop you getting hit. Yeah, if the opportunity opens up to punch them, great, but this is really your defense. You're using this hand to stop yourself getting hit and lining them up to when you can deliver your kosh in with maximum effect. Okay? The kosh is not a prolonged fighting weapon. What you're looking for is to open up a vulnerability and then smack them in the side of the head and end the fight with a single hit from the kosh. Okay? So that's the way the weapon is designed to be used. There are a few other tricks that we'll cover, but that's where I want to start with. So let's have a look at the lines of attack if we have our kosh, okay? The first one is what we would call, I tend to try and put everything into the same system so that all weapons have the same terminology, okay? I don't always then use that when I'm teaching because I kind of believe that the language and the moves and the techniques are part of the respect of that tradition. So when I teach Savat, I tend to use the French terminology, okay? When I teach side sword, I tend to use the Italian terminology. But that's not to say I don't have other names for them as well, just to be able to cross-reference across. So in this case, the one I'm looking at is what we would call a vertical down. In this case, it's the straight over the top and down. It's really the obvious attack from here. It's coiled up, and I'm just going to come straight over and down through the other person's head, hopefully. And as I said, if that misses, most of the time, that will kind of harmlessly bounce around my arm rather than finding a solid connect with my body, which is why I'm keeping it out to the side rather than forward, which would give me extra range on it, but means that when it comes through, it's heading for my nuts, and I don't want that. So I'm going to keep that off to one side, so when I swing, it goes past my body and keeps me safe. So that's your first one, vertical down. We also have to be aware of the opposite of that, vertical up, because it comes in occasionally useful. And for that, instead, I'm going to drop my hand down and swing upwards. So rather than down, this time I drop the hand and swing up. It's really hard to do that slowly. Down, swing up. Okay? So that allows me to attack down, or indeed to attack up. So drop the hand, up it comes. Drop the hand, up it comes. Okay? So that's got us up and down. As I've said, we don't use side to side, okay? Because that is guaranteed to hurt you. The other main ones we use are the diagonal downs. So we have our true diagonal down, starting on our good side and coming across. Okay, that is likely, if it misses, to embed in my butt. And that's fine, because it's well padded. But in reality, it's not an area that's going to suffer a lot of damage. So if I don't connect, I can kind of absorb that there without too much pain. Okay, so that diagonal there is kind of okay to use. But if I can use that diagonal, I might be better striking through with the down instead. But it's worth knowing it's there. The more useful one is the false diagonal down. So I'm coming across to the false side and flicking it across this way. Now there's two ways I can do this. Because the problem is, if I just go from here and go for the diagonal down, it goes through my head. I'm so built trying to do this, I'm now trying to not correct for it. But it goes through my head like that, which is not what I want. So there's two options. One, I have to raise my hand a little and swing across. Up and across, so that it's not connecting with me. The other option is to push it forward and then go so it comes in front of my face. Forwards, so I can... Oh, that was terrible. Get back there. So I can go forward and then flick, and again it's not near my face. But that's coming down at that opposite diagonal here. If anybody's done any of the cane work, we were talking last time, if any of my students have done it where we've done this one where the cane's up in the backhand here, you have that same thing when you want to strike with that side. You'll be familiar with that tactic. But essentially, normally I would say it's easier to go up above your head, up until your knuckles at the same height as your head, and then you're fine to swipe down at that diagonal. And if you miss, this time it's going out to the side and it's back into that kind of dead area we looked at with the vertical down, so I'm okay with that. We don't use we use the diagonals up in a figure of 8 occasion when we use belt. We don't do it with kosh. The reason for that is, once you send something up, gravity's going to bring it back down again. And it's much harder to control when you're pulling it down. The weight of the... I'm trying to think how to explain this. The weight of this moving keeps a tautness in the string, so I can control where it goes. Once it reaches its maximum peak and starts to fall, that tautness is gone from the cord, so I'm no longer in control of where that falls. It falls on whatever trajectory I left it at when it reached its topmost point. So it's much harder to control if you send it up. So generally, we don't, just to make it easier. So really our attacks are down, up, diagonal one way, diagonal the other way. And those are really the attacks that we're going to use. Okay? Right, so we've covered stance, we've covered our attacks. Let's look at how we're actually going to use this, okay? So the first thing we're going to look at is if I'm facing off against someone, they're probably going to be in the other stance, okay? Because when we're looking at this, they're probably unarmed, they've probably got their left hand forward if they've ever done any training, okay? Doesn't really matter. If a punch is coming in, it depends which side the punch is coming in, okay? Now it's going to come roughly through this center line because they're going to try and hit me in the head, I'm assuming, or the stomach. So if it's coming on that center line, I can move it across that side or move it across that side with my lead hand with kind of equal ease, okay? So depending which side it's coming from will determine which way I want to push it, okay? And it's normally the opposite of what you would think. Normally, if a punch was coming on this side, I would block it on this side to keep myself on what we call the inside line. So their hands are outside of mine and I control the center space. Okay? That's what we do in most boxing. Most of these kind of blocks that we look at will keep me on the inside line. I don't want that with kosh. So if it's coming in from this side, I want to catch it and move it right the way across my body. So what I will normally do is reach, block, and then try and actually grab the wrist. It's really hard to explain this without somebody else helping me. And pull them across the body. Okay? So what that means, when they throw that punch, it moves across here and down, and they end up open in this stance here. Likewise, if they punch with the other hand, I want to grab it and move it across and down, so they end up here. And what that means is if the punch comes in on this side, I want to catch here and drag across this side. Does that make sense? I'm hoping so. Once you've decided which way you're grabbing them, you then look at which way you're going to hit them. So if I grab this side and pull across here, okay, their arm is stretched out here and their head is here. I want to strike into the back of the head with that false diagonal down. Okay, if I've gone the other way, grabbed them, pulled the hand across this way, their arm's now here and their head is in front of me, that's when I'm coming straight down into the top of them. Okay, I'm going to try on Troy here and see if this makes it any clearer. So what I'm saying is the first one is if I get a punch coming in on this side, now I'm aware he's a bit short for this really, I want to catch and grab. So he's off balance in this direction and you can see the head is exposed there. Now I can try for a straight down on the top. The problem is he might be struggling and I might not get him all the way across. But if I come up and down on this diagonal, I will always find the back of the head. So it comes in, I block, I pull across, diagonal across the back of the head. If it's the other side, and I've caught it, grabbed it, whoop, stop, where are you going? And pull him across this way, try and keep him on the chair there, pull him across this way, that diagonal will definitely miss. If I want to be absolutely sure, I'm going to use my diagonal down, but I'm going to prefer to just do a straight smack into the top of the head. So the punch comes, I block, I pull, down in the back of the head. Okay, he's not cooperating much with me tonight. Cross, pull, down into the back of the head. Okay, you just be drunk and lie there for a bit. So, depending on where he is, that's where I want to hit. Okay? So I'm using this, and I may have several blocks where I'm just tapping things out of the way, but what I'm looking for is that point when I can grab, block, grab, open up, and then strike down with the kosh. Okay? That's really your basic technique with kosh. Okay? And to be honest, that worked with a blackjack or something shorter as well, something a bit more rigid. You can use that same tactic. In fact, you can use the same thing with short inflexible if you want to. It's not how we use it, but it is another possibility. It is worth knowing a couple of extra tricks though. One of them is that low blow I talked about earlier. Okay? I'm going to drop the hand and come up. Now that clearly only has one viable target, and that is the nads. Okay? So I'm quite often going to use this with some form of high distraction. Okay? So that could be a massette to the face, it could be a piqué, flicking out my fingers, trying to get the eyes. You know, it could even just be holding my hand out towards the face. Okay, but I want their attention high and focused up here as I drop my hand and come up between the legs. Okay? Because that gives me a nice low blow. It's a dirty trick, but everybody's, if they've fought against you before or seen you fight, or you've even hit them once and it hasn't finished it, they're expecting these blows to come down. So suddenly changing the direction and bringing one up is a nice little reversal to have in your arsenal. The other thing that's worth being aware of is that you have this flexible bit in the middle, okay? Now I'm not going to suggest for this weapon that you're going to pull it tight and try and use it as an extra blocking surface, okay? The chances are if you're in a fight at this range, you're as well using your hands, okay? So I wouldn't encourage that kind of behavior like I'm going to talk about later again with belt. However, what we do have is the ability to kind of control. Sorry, I'm just checking my notes here as I'm going here. Yeah, okay. Is to control an arm once it's been blocked. So if I block with this back hand, so rather than keeping it out the way and using my front hand, if I decide instead to drop that from this guarded position, if it ends up down here, if I take a normal block, you'll notice that forms an arc that just swings right the way through the air here. Now what happens is if that happens around an arm, sorry, God, he's not cooperating. Oh, I need to be lower, but from here, you'll see that drops nicely over his arm there. So if I'm from here, there it goes. From there, I can reach through and grab that with my other hand. And I now have control of this hand. Okay? Which allows me, if I'm prone to getting in close, it gives me an attachment point if I don't want them running away. Okay? If I'm more inclined to control situations, I can always look to step in, try and get elbow to elbow control, and kind of turn this into a lock. I know I'm not in the best position for you guys to see this. but I can kind of turn that into a lock and try and take this into a controlled takedown and control them with them on the floor. This will work equally well on the other side, but what I have to do is prepare that as a secondary thing. So I'm going to take my block as I would do normally with my offhand, but then wrap that around once I've got the initial block on. So, punch comes in, block it up. Oh. You know what, this will be easier when lockdown's over, just because I can go back to hitting real people. They're much better at doing what you tell them. So, I'm going to block, swing that around, grab that, then I've got control here. And I can still step over and look to get into like figure 4 arm locks or whatever, using that as a very solid attachment point. So I have that option available to me as well. Now obviously, if you go around smacking people in the head with, I don't know, whatever you've managed to pick up, a carrier bag with some oranges in it, you can do a serious amount of damage, okay? And in terms of self-defense, you don't want to be killing the other person, okay? You didn't start this fight. The chances of you needing to kill your opponent to end it are very, very slim. What you want to do is incapacitate your opponent, okay? So in this case, what you can look to do is as that punch comes in and you drag across, rather than taking that swipe down for the head, if you angle yourself a little, that swipe down goes through the extended elbow, yeah? And if you can smash that elbow, you're going to do a lot of damage, you're going to do a lot of pain, you're going to end the fight. You're not going to kill them. Okay? But bear in mind, that's still only a viable technique if they are quite heavily armed. Okay? If they are unarmed and you do this, you're in the wrong. So you have to be aware when you start looking at improvised weapons exactly where you stand in terms of reasonable force. But a slightly less lethal version, you can catch, pull through the armpit. Through the elbow. Let's get the right body part. And really, that's kind of the kosh. What have I put there? Oh yeah, sorry, I'm just checking my own notes there. One thing I have also said is, because I'm up here and I'm boxing, don't forget you have feet. Okay? Anything that draws attention downwards is drawing away from my hand and the deadly strike I want to deliver. Okay? So anything that draws attention down is good, okay? So, coup de pied bar, we've talked about before. I'm going to step back so you can see my feet a bit better. A coup de pied bar, that kind of step through, purring down the shin. A quick lateral bass, nice little quick kick into the shin. Any of that kind of stuff is going to draw attention down. And as soon as that attention is down, you can grab, pull the shoulder in at the back of the head. Okay? And that is kosh in a nutshell, okay? It takes a lot of practice to actually make it work with any certainty, because the weapon in itself and it being flexible makes it harder to control. But realistically, that's most of the tactics that exist with using a kosh. Okay, it's not a complicated weapon, it's just a leveler. If the other guy's bigger and stronger than you, this can give you the edge that you wouldn't have otherwise. So, that is kosh. I'm going to pop this down, and I'm going to grab a quick drink, because it is very, very warm out here. Oh. Oh. So, as we go to talking about improvised weapons, we tend to look back to a time where streets were generally more violent. Now, what I mean by that is there was a greater prevalence for small improvised weapons. Now, if there is a fight, it doesn't tend to be lightly armed muggers against lightly armed civilians. Okay? What it tends to be is either unarmed people on unarmed people, or very specifically armed people, gun, knife, against an unarmed person. Okay? That's the world that we live in. Okay? And you need to be aware of dealing with those things. We'll cover some of those in other videos. But when we're looking at this, this is much more the responsive element of if you can carry a small weapon that we're looking at. So what I thought I would cover is some of the interesting gangs we had in the Victorian era. Okay? Not necessarily London, not necessarily UK, but some of the interesting groups that were around the same kind of time period, to give you an idea of some of the things that were going on. And also, I have a passing interest in kind of it's etymology, how words are developed. So I find the gang names quite interesting as well. So let's start with the one that everybody thinks of if you go for Victorian street gang. Most people will go to Peaky Blinders as your starting point. So let's start with them because there's been lots said about them and most of it is wrong, which is not great. So Peaky Blinders, a Birmingham-based street gang, rose up to prevalence, pretty much took over the entire gang situation in Birmingham. Now, everybody says the reason they were called Peaky Blinders, and you will find this widely quoted, was because they sewed razor blades into their peak caps so that they could use them as a weapon. So you take your hat off and you literally slash people across the face with it. There's a few things wrong with this. One, if you had them on the front of your peak, they end up sticking up at an angle, because I've seen people who've actually tried to recreate these, and it ends up utterly useless as a weapon. Now, from an intimidation point of view, possibly, but as a weapon, it's not a good option. You would be better literally holding the razor blade. If you put them, as some people suggested, on the back of the hat, so you can grab the peak and whip it, it works a little better, but you're still only getting slight penetration on cardboard when I've seen this done. Okay? The chances of that going through clothing is very minimal, and it's not really going to do a lot of damage. Again, intimidation maybe. My main problem with it is that Peaky Blinders are about 20 years before Gillette patent their first disposable razor patent. So, unless they had prototypes of these kinds of blades that people are talking about them having, it's very unlikely that had anything to do with their name at all. Because simply they just wouldn't have had access to the implement that's meant to have given them their name. So, where does it come from? There's two possible answers. One is one of their standard fighting techniques was using a knife, not a straight razor, just a standard knife. They would cut above somebody's head, above their eyes on the forehead. That is an area that doesn't do a lot of damage but creates a lot of blood. And all of that blood goes straight into your eyes. Okay? And if somebody can't see because their eyes are full of blood, they are then much easier to stab up. And they are much less of a threat to you. So one version would be they were wearing peak caps. Nobody's denying this. So that's where the peaky comes from. And they were blinders because that was their standard tactic. Blind your opponent and then get in and finish them off. So that's one option. The other option that I think is probably more likely is that a blinder is kind of local slang for being very well dressed. If you think about London had Bobby Dazzlers or whatever, there's always these kind of words for how somebody was dressed up. So so a blinder was, you know, oh, so sharp, it's a blinder, they're dressed so well, they're stunning to look at. So quite possibly, because unlike a lot of street gangs, the Peaky Blinders really prided themselves on their appearance, their tweed suits, their silk cravats. They had these peak caps, which is again the peaky part, but the blinder probably just was distinguished them from the other street gangs because they were the well-dressed ones. Anyway, that's a little bit on the Peaky Blinders. Let's move on to one of my other favourite groups, which is Manchester, which is the Scuttlers, which weren't really a gang in and of themselves. There was a collection of gangs known as the Scuttlers, and they were Birmingham-based street gangs that went around hitting people quite a lot. I particularly like them because they had a habit of using belts as weapons, and clearly I like belts, and it's something I'm going to be talking about, so it's a group that I'm quite interested in. They used to actually sharpen the belt buckles for using, and they're either going to use them, as I will show you later on, or they wrap them around their hands and use them just as knuckle dusters. They also had steel-fronted clogs as well, so a lot of the kicking stuff they were doing was very vicious. But anyway, they were known as the Scuttlers. They were Manchester-based group. I'm trying to get my cities wrong at times. Definitely Manchester. And they and the reason that they were called the Scuttlers was simply that a scuttle was again local slang, and that just meant a street fight. So when there was a scuttle, the police told there was a scuttle going on, they'd turn up to arrest the brawlers. So those people engaged in scuttling were the Scuttlers. So there were several gangs, but are communally known as the Scuttlers. the interesting thing about this is, in order to deal with this, they decided that the reason that this was happening was you had a lot of young people with no employment, no entertainment, that their parents were essentially turfing them out in the morning, not letting them back in the house till the evening. So they were just roaming around the streets with nothing to do. So brawling and being part of the gangs was a family, a social thing, and something to do. So instead, they started trying to get them involved in youth programs. One of those youth programs was an amateur football team that actually got a lot of them off the streets and playing football rather than stabbing each other. Interestingly, that football group, that football club went on to become professional and is now known as Manchester United. So from humble and relatively good beginnings has risen this mighty football club known around the world. Anyway, that's the Scuttlers. Where should we go next? Let's go north. Glasgow. You have the penny gangs, or the penny mobs. Really, there's not a lot to say on them. They get the name because they were robbers. They were thieves. They weren't really in it for the violence. They were in it for the material gain. So they weren't really trying to kill people. They mostly just wanted whatever people had. And the name comes from is they would kill you for not even a penny. So even if you had less than a penny on you, they would happily kill you just for that amount of money. So a rather brutal group of gangs up in Scotland at the same time. Now, let's move across. We're a little bit earlier, but if we move across to India, we have the Thuggies, which are a great group, and also tie-in flexible weapons, almost as if that's why they come in. So the Thuggy in Hindi means deceiver. So it was someone who deceived people. And this group of people were known as deceivers because what they would do is they'd join a travelling caravan because people would clump together for safety. So somebody would join, one of the Thuggies would join and walk with them for a few days. And maybe a day and a half later, another one would join. And over time, slowly the gang would join and integrate with the travelling caravan, which also gave them time to work out the scope if they were rich enough to worth robbing, and also their comparative strength and what weaponry they might have. When they decided that it was time, they would wait normally till the evening when people were quieting down, and that's when they would attack. Now, they really didn't enjoy bloodletting. They really weren't fans of carrying swords. What they carried were handkerchiefs, and they would garrote people. So what they would do is they would wait till people are kind of backs turned, handkerchief goes over, pulled tight, and strangle them to death, and then bury the bodies. Part of this, I've been told, is because if they spilt blood, there'll be more chances of the bodies being dug up. Some people have it to do with the particular religious practices about spilling blood, but for whatever reason, they were using these flexible weapons to get in. Partly, I think it was just they were probably easier to carry and easier to hide than a sword when you're pretending to be a poor traveller. But these groups became quite well known, and their tactics became quite well known, and they were quite fearsome and renowned. And it's from that root that we get the term that we use today, thug, in English. That is just from a word that's travelled from the Hindi across into the English language. So we now have thugs as people that are ne'er-do-wells of various descriptions. Right, okay, I'm going to talk about one more, maybe two if I've got time. How am I doing? I told you, sorry, I said to Michael when I started this, I've said, I've got very little material tonight, I'm probably going to finish early, and now I'm looking like I'm going to finish late. Isn't this great?
Right now.
Yeah, so the other one to talk about particularly is the Apaches, or Apache. They were a Parisian street gang who had lots of different tactics. They were, again, very much a fan of garroting for a different reason. They weren't really trying to kill anybody with the garroting tactics. They would move in small gangs. One person would garrote them, kind of turn and lift the person on their back, pulling the garrote. So that person was completely immobilized. And then other people one person would be a lookout, and the third person would rifle their pockets for anything that was worth nicking, and then they'd all scarper. However, this could take a little while, and the chance of a snapped neck or just prolonged strangulation causing death or long-term injury was a genuinely worried thing. I mean, they were also more violent as well. They created some wonderful weapons. The standard weapon that's kind of associated with them is this amazing tiny little pistol with no barrel on it. It's just a small, short-range pistol. But then the handle is a knuckle duster. So if you finish shooting people, you turn it round and you've got a knuckle duster. Not only that, underneath the barrel there's a little flip-out fold-out knife in case you want to stab somebody rather than use the knuckle dusters. So, a well-organised group. Of slight interest to us because some of the people teaching Bartitsu end up going across and very much marketing themselves as ways to defend against La Apache. Now, they get their name because at the time we've really just got the discovery of the Americas and people are starting to encounter the Native American tribes. In particular, one of the main tribes that was encountered was the Apaches. So, although it is probably not PC or in any way factually correct, it was believed that these Native Americans were incredibly savage, bearly people. So the ferocity and savagery shown by this street gang in Paris was likened to the Native Americans, and that's where they got the name of the Apaches. Yes, so there you go, there's some entomology. I was tempted to go a little bit earlier and start talking about Elizabethan Shakespeare, Silver, and what's his name? Who's the Italian guy at the same time? Something. Is it Vincenzo? Somebody? Anyway, I'm not going to go into that because I've run out of time already. Yeah. That's a tale for another day, just about where we get names from. But as I said, I've gone on enough already. Instead, let's look at belt. Now, I said I would go through the safe versions. This is my safety sparring belt. It's not the one I'm going to be using today, but it's the one, or it's one of the ones that I started training with. It's ones that I give students to train with. What essentially it is a tie with a stress ball in the end, and then about 4 rows of stitching to actually keep it in. The thing is, a stress ball is fairly solid. If you hit yourself with this, or you're sparring with somebody and you hit them with it, they'll know about it. They'll probably end up with quite a sizable bruise to show for it, but it's not going to kill anybody. So that is why we use them, and as you can see, they will operate very much like a belt once you get them in motion. See, you'll hit yourself, and that's why you should always use these ones, just like I'm not going to. But that is the safety one that I would recommend if you want to start practicing with any of this. Stress ball, get them for like £1 off eBay. Tie, you can get them for about 20p from a charity shop. A little bit of sewing, you have a practice weapon. The one I'm actually going to use is actually one of my belts, not the one I'm wearing. This is a black one. The one I'm wearing is exactly the same but green. But it's just a standard webbing belt, double metal D-ring on it. So what I'm looking at here is we need to start off with thinking about the properties of the belt. Okay, it's flexible. We've already covered that. It is, it's not sharp, but this time it's long. I've got probably the best part of 1 meter there. Okay, that means I can use this at a completely different range to where I am using the kosh. So that changes things quite significantly. Now ideally you want it a length so that it doesn't quite touch the ground when you hold it out. Hopefully you can see that. I can't actually see my own screen today, so I'm having to guess. But so I've got that there. If it was longer, like when I'm using the ties, I kind of have to wrap it around my hand a couple of times to get it to that length. It doesn't matter. The wrapping around the hand is not important. The important thing is that the length is about right. Now, this is why I wear my belt left-handed. And in fact, so do many of my students after we started training this. The reason for that is how you need to be able to draw this weapon, okay? And if I wear it as I would normally do, if I'm right-handed, I would normally feed it to the left. If I pull my belt off at that point, I am then holding the metal end that I want to be dangerous and swirling around in my hand, which means I'm flailing with just the material, which isn't what I want to be doing. So instead, even though I'm right-handed, I'm going to feed this to the right as if I was left-handed, so that when I grab it with my left hand, I'm grabbing the metal, and I pull, my right hand comes to the other end. So from there, I can drop and start straight into my swinging with the metal foremost. Okay? If you need to wrap it, if it's a bit longer, let me grab the... So this one, when I hold it, it's on the ground. If I swing that, it's just going to bounce off the ground. So instead, if I was drawing this one, I draw it to the full end, but then I throw it backwards over my hand, loop and catch it, and then I'm straight into my swinging at the length I want it to be. If I needed it to be shorter, I let it loop again, and now I have a slightly shorter weapon. If I want, I have to make it go the other way if I want to then unwind it to make it longer again. Okay, that's all stuff you can play with if you want to, but just so you're aware of how you get the belt, how you draw, and so quick unbuckle, draw, you're good to go. Okay? So, let's have a look at the important things about belt. First of all, I'm going to have my hand forward, so that unlike keeping it out of the way like I was when I was using the kosh, this time my hand wants to be forward. I want to make the full use of the length. This is not at any point going to be dangling out here. Belt is constantly moving, so there's never going to be a chance for them to grab it. Okay? So, I have to be aware of a few things. First of all, I need to practice my horizontal swings. So from that, this is over the top, so this is going forward, and it's to one side. Okay? It's not hitting me. I don't allow it to creep over and hit me in the leg, and I can quite happily move backwards and forwards and slowly sideways, but not very fast sideways. I can move around a little bit whilst keeping that going. Okay? So that's the first thing I need to be able to practice, is just having that happily spinning round. The next thing I need to do is learn how to stop this safely, and there are two methods. One is to ground it, which is what we shall say is the entry level one, and that is simply I bend my knees, it hits the ground, the energy goes into the ground, and the belt stops. Okay? Nothing wrong with that technique other than potentially you damage your floor or your belt. The better version is once you've got the hang of this a bit and you're a bit used to your belt, you can spin it, you're just going to put your foot out and let it hit your foot. And either the metal will hit the sole of your foot and bounce and the energy's out of it, or it'll wrap over the top, curl round your foot, whatever, it's not a problem. It'll then uncurl again, but you're taking the energy out on your foot and your foot's not taking any damage. Ideally, if you can get it absolutely perfectly, you dead it, he says, if you can get it perfect, you hit it there, it comes back up and you catch it with the other hand. And that's you then got it ready to put away or to use in a different fashion. So going round, you almost want to kick it back up, catch it with the other hand, you're now armed with a belt again. So, step one, we need to be able to go forward. Step two, we also need to be able to spin upwards with equal ease. Stop it going, spin it back the other way. Now there's not a lot to teach here, you just have to practice until you can do it. Once you're happy with it, you need to be able to move to the other side. I'll tell you what I'm going to do just for a second though, is now that I'm not actually, Troy has not been a lot of help today. I think he's half asleep still. We're just going to move him out of the way.
It's the heat, I think.
It's the heat. I'm telling you, it's getting to me. It's obviously getting to him too. Just so I've got a bit more room to work with here. So once I've got this going, I want to be able to then move across and get it spinning on the other side of my body quite happily. And then I'm going to bring it back and I'm going to stop it. I'm going to spin the other direction, move that across my body so that I can spin that one on the other side of the body. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to stop it again. So that's me able to go forwards and backwards and then switch to the other side of my body and back again. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going forward. And the next thing I want to do is the back. It is basically the figure eight. So I go. Okay, I'm exaggerating my arm movement. But you see that is doing a figure of eight in front of me. When I speed that up and narrow that field down, what I'm doing is creating an area in front of me which is constantly full of metal. And that's what I'm going to use to defend myself. Once I'm happy with that, of course, I need to be able to do it upwards as well. I'm less good at this, as you'll see my arc is much wider. Okay? Those are your starting techniques. Okay? A lot of this is about control, because what you're actually going to do is you're not going to try and strike. Okay? If I'm spinning this and I actively try and strike somebody, okay, I might hit or I might not, but it's all kind of all over the place, and then it's dead, and it's nothing to me. The other guy is on me and we're on the ground and he's grappling and stabbing me in the head. Instead, I'm creating a defensive shield in front of me. This area between me and him that it now hurts to walk through. And I've got to hope that either he decides it's not worth it and goes off to attack somebody who's easier prey, Option number 2, he comes in and catches the belt to his head and takes himself out. Okay? If he's got through that, he's hopefully distracted enough that I can step in with my boxing and my jiu-jitsu and finish things off. Okay? But belt is primarily an intimidation and setting up an area that somebody can't move through. That is its whole point as a weapon. We did play around with actively trying to what they call dart it. I don't know if anybody's seen Dart or if anybody's a fan of Kung Fu movies where you kind of spin it, catch it on your wrist and then throw it off and it comes off as a shooting straight line. We spent a lot of time playing around with that, and what you find is it works better with a longer rope. It doesn't work with something this short, and even when it does work, it's not a great weapon unless you put a lot of practice in it. You want to know how difficult it is? Watch the outtakes from, is it Shanghai Noon, is it? The Jackie Chan one where he's in America, in the Wild West. And the outtakes of that where he has a horseshoe tied to a bit of rope. He is someone who's trained martial arts his whole life, and it works maybe about 30% of the time. Okay? You as a normal person who's training this occasionally is not going to be able to pull off those kind of moves in a real life situation. We keep it simple, we keep it practical. I set up a cordon area. I've quarantined myself from the other person with this whirling metal. It is then up to them how they want to succeed. I am not directly going to try and hit them. I am just going to create this space. And I can move back and I can control when the engagement actually starts. But all I'm doing is keeping this moving. Okay? Now, because fights don't always happen one-on-one with somebody there, you need to be able to move. Okay? Now the problem is, if I'm spinning this and I turn round at 90 degrees, inertia is still taking the belt in the direction it was originally. So you have to learn how to move with it so that you're controlling the belt and the belt just isn't going on its as it's pulled by the forces already acting on it. Okay, this is all of the lovely physics stuff. If you want vector diagrams and stuff, this is where you can go wild. So what we need to be aware of, if we're going forward, when it gets to the bottom, we can essentially turn. Because what we're going to do is, as it gets to the bottom, we turn and pull, and it will move at 90 degrees. But I can only go backwards. If I try and do it at any other point in the cycle, I will hit myself. Okay? If I'm going upwards, I can only go forward, and I can only do it at the top of the cycle. Top, round it goes. And I just spin it a little faster to change the forces acting upon it. And that allows me to turn. That is not a quick turn, that's only a 90 degrees turn. We do have a 180 turn, but this is the one that hurts people's heads. Okay? Because what I've got to do at this point is keep it spinning here, and as it comes across, that's when I turn. And what is the downward swing there becomes the upward swing on the other side. The problem is, if I'm spinning forward here, once I've done this, I'm spinning upwards in the opposite direction. And that takes some people a little bit of time to get their head around. But I can swing here, cut across, and turn 180. Okay? My problem now is I have to... my brain's collapsing on me there. So I'll try it from a different angle. So, from here, I'm going forwards. And there's my turn. Once I'm here, I need to be going diagonally upwards. And then I moved again. It's when it's up. Because I'm going backwards, I need to do it when it's at that top corner there. That's when I have to move. So when I'm going up, I turn, but then I have to change the direction of my hand to keep the belt moving. And that allows me to turn 180 or 90 degrees. Obviously you can use the 90 degrees to turn less than 90 degrees. But that allows you to move around and keep that wall that you've created, you can move that to where it needs to be. hopefully that makes some degree of sense. Okay? I mean, I'm going to talk about... Oh, wow, I'm really running out of time. I'm going to talk about a few other tricks and things you can do with it, just so you're aware that they exist. But if you just practice that... Now, it's going to take you a while to get it, but once you've got it, that is a surprisingly effective self-defense method. We've used it a lot in sparring against Kane. Kane can't even really get close. It's really difficult. It all comes down to timing. Very hard to get past. So, useful to know with a little bit of practice you can actually create quite an effective self-defense. Now, what else can we do with it? If we happen to get to a situation where things close, or I've done something stupid and this is dead weight, what I want to do is bring it to the other hand so that it's kind of a shoulder's width apart. And we're going to talk about this again next week when we talk about coat. We can use that as a blocking tool. We don't pull it and push, we kind of snap it. So as you can see, if I move my hands forward and then apart at the last minute, I get this little snapping motion, which is when the acceleration is fastest. That means there's more force moving away from me, which means it's going to take more of the force out of whatever is moving towards me. So rather than blocking like it was a cane, I kind of snap it out into the direction of the attack. Okay, so it's worth knowing you can do that. Obviously, if it's a punch that's coming in and you can snap that, there's nothing to stop you wrapping that, just like when we talked about Kosh. You can move into kind of arm locks. You know, you can just pull, get in there with punches or whatever. Okay, and obviously, there's nothing to stop you doing that same thing. Once you've got it, you do a block, drop it over and wrap. You can do that in the other hand as well if you want to get in with your right hand. It's entirely up to you. You can use this in both hands. I can only use it right-handed. Okay? But if you put the time and practice in, you can equally use this left-handed and switch between the two. Other than that, there's a few little tricks you can do, but they're all so complicated, I guarantee you will never pull them off. If you come and watch me doing demonstrations, I will show you weird and wonderful things you can do with a belt that are very impressive and make the audience go, ooh. They will never ever work in real life, so I'm not going to show them to you now. If you learn nothing else about belt, learn that wall and use that wall. Right, okay, what have I written there? Oh, I've mentioned darting, that's what that's on about. Right, okay, so I will try and draw things to a close because I'm aware that I've kind of gone on for quite a bit of a ramble there. But what we've looked at is we've looked at the flexible weapons, okay? The Kosh, quite a simple weapon, keep it chambered, wait for your opening, and then finish it, okay? And you've got a couple of little tricks in there if you want it, and you've got a couple of control methods if you'd rather get in closer. The belt is very different. It's about creating a space in front of you that the other person can't move through. It's entirely defensive. Don't try and be offensive with it. Let them come to you. If you are drawn into an attack with it, you lose. So create that space. Very different kind of weapons, but it does mean if you pick up anything, if you can get a bit of rope and tie a knot in one end, you have something that's a bit like a belt. If you have, for example, I've got a couple of dogs. When I'm walking the dogs, I have a dog lead on me. Okay, that'll work as a belt if I ever needed it to. Obviously, you'd have to take the dog off it first. Don't try and use the dog as a weight. That's just a bad plan. Animal cruelty. Don't go down that line. But you have those kind of things available to you. Anything you can pick up and it's flexible, you can use in that way, either short or long, obviously depending on the size of it. So next week we're going to take a bit of a change. We've already looked at the long and flexible, which is the cane. We've spent quite a bit of time on that. I'm not going to cover it again. Instead, what I'm going to do is we're going to look at the short and flexible, which is like the baton. It covers things like eskrima sticks, police truncheons, Indian clubs, anything that's that kind of 1.5-ish bit of something inflexible. That's what we're going to be looking at next week. So that's your short club. And then we're also going to be looking at the two-handed flexible, which is normally a coat or a hoodie. It's based on clug. I'm going to be talking about those things next week. So we're going to be looking at a really short impact weapon, and we're also going to be looking at something quite big and voluminous and how we can use that to our advantage. So we're going to carry on with that kind of improvised weaponry going forward. Now people have already started asking me when we're going to be going back. As far as I'm concerned, lockdown's still in full operation. I'm always going to listen to the scientists rather than the politicians, just coming from a scientific background. I'm not trying to make a living out of this. I don't feel a force to go back for my livelihood. Okay, there are other people who aren't in the same situation, and I understand theirs is different. But for me, I'll not be going back to face-to-face training until I think it's safe, and entirely safe to do so. So I would suspect that is not next month. We're talking August at the earlier. That's kind of bad for my students. It's bad for me. But what it does mean is that next week we will know what we're going to look at. I'm going to pull an out syllabus to look at the month after that as well. So there's going to be at least another 4 or 5 classes, or 4 or 5 sessions online like this before we kind of quit and go back to face-to-face meetings. So, as usual, if there's anything you want to ask me about, anything you want to know more about, anything you want to challenge me about, how I do things, anything you want to tell me about your own experiences or other techniques that I've maybe missed, let me know. I really would love to learn from you guys, as much as hopefully you're learning a little bit from me and finding these sessions interesting. So we'll kind of wrap up there and we will fall out. So, attention and fall out. Once again, it's been a pleasure having you guys with me for the last hour. If you want to know about any of the stuff I've kind of alluded to from earlier videos, they're all still on our Facebook feed, so, you know, wander through, watch them all. They're there for you to use as you see fit. Other than that, there's quite a lot happening in Bartitsu at the minute. There are people getting interviews and stuff going. If you haven't seen those, there's been a couple of interviews with instructors from around the UK worth having a look at. I know that in the hopefully the near future there's going to be another actual kind of Bartitsu compendium style book coming out, that should hopefully be a nice core training manual for a lot of people who are training this as well. Just a little updated from the collections that Tony Wolf did about 15 years ago now. So there's a lot happening. This is a good time. Keep informed. Get on all of the Facebook groups. Find out what's going on if you want to get involved, because it's a good time to get in and start training Bartitsu now. Well, when lockdown's over, to be honest. But anyway, that's enough of me talking. Thank you very much. Go enjoy the rest of your evening. Until I see you all next week, you know, stay safe, be sensible, but above all, be kind to each other, okay? Night.